Chapter 5. Caro Kann defense, advance variation, short variation. We will replay the main line and the important sublines, with pauses for tactics. Welcome back to our Caro Kann defense series. There is an important balance we need in this course. So far, most of our model games have taught the Caro Kann from Black's point of view. Kann showed the basic idea. Capablanca showed restraint and heavy piece pressure. But Vinnik showed how to meet Tal's wing attack. Anand showed how Black can neutralize the short variation. Now we switch sides. This chapter is from White's perspective, Viswanathan Anand against Anatoly Karpov, Tilburg 1991. Karpov was one of the greatest Caro Kann defenders ever. So when Anand defeats him in the advance variation, the game becomes a perfect lesson in how White can improve against the plans we have already studied. Your job in this lesson is to watch how White avoids passive defense, challenges Black's structure, creates a passed e-pawn, and keeps the initiative alive until Black's solid Caro Kann position breaks. e4. c6. Karpov chooses the Caro Kann. From White's point of view, this is the first practical question: are we going to let Black get the same comfortable structure we saw in earlier chapters? d4. d5. Black challenges the center. e5. Anand chooses the advance variation. White takes space. This is the starting point of our whole series. White gains territory, and Black tries to prove that the advanced center can be attacked. Bishop f5. Karpov develops the bishop before e6. This is the key Caro Kann improvement over many French defense structures. White cannot simply hope the bishop will stay bad. White must make a useful plan against it. Knight f3. Anand chooses the short variation setup. This is already a practical improvement over the older bishop d3 exchange approach. White develops first and keeps more flexibility. e6. Black builds the center after the bishop has escaped. Again, Black has solved the usual light-squared bishop problem. So White needs active play, not just a claim of extra space. Bishop e2. White continues the short variation. The bishop develops quietly, White prepares to castle, and the center remains stable. a6. Karpov plays a useful waiting move. Black controls b5 and prepares a flexible setup with nd7, possibly c5 and sometimes bg6. The move also asks White to reveal the plan. Kingside castles. Knight d7. Both sides continue development. Black prepares normal Caro Kann pressure. White must decide whether to sit and defend d4, or create new problems for Black. Knight on the b file to d2. White supports the center and prepares queenside expansion. This is one of the important improvements against Black's earlier plan. White does not rush with kingside pawns. White first completes development and keeps control. Bishop g6. Karpov retreats the bishop. Black wants to preserve the bishop and keep the structure solid. a3. A quiet but useful move. White prepares b4 and makes it harder for Black to use b4 as an outpost. Against the Caro Kann, space only matters if White can turn it into useful squares. Let's see what happens if c4 is played instead of a3. c4. Knight e7. c5. The white pawns are slightly overextended and may become a target with moves like b6 or f6. a5. Stops white from playing b4. Let's see what happens if b6 is played instead of a5. b6. Dubious move. b4. a5. b5. b takes c5. d takes c5. Knight takes c5. Bishop a3. Knight d7. Queen a4. c5. b6. Queen takes b6. Bishop b5. White is better. Let's return back to the main line. Let's return back to the main line. Knight h6. Black develops the knight toward f5. This is a familiar Caro-Kann idea from the earlier chapters. Black wants pressure on d4 and control of key central squares. c4. Anand strikes immediately. This is a major white improvement. In many black model games, black attacks white's d4 pawn with c5. Here white answers by challenging the center before black gets complete comfort. Bishop e7. Karpov develops calmly. Black is ready to castle and still hopes to prove that white's center can be targeted. Knight b3. White improves the knight. The knight eyes c5 and helps support queenside play. Anand is not only defending d4, he is creating active squares. Let's see what happens if c5 is played instead of knight b3. c5. a5. Stop b4. Black is slightly better. It is going to be hard for white to hold the central pawn structure. Let's return back to the main line. Kingside castles. Black castles. Karpov's position looks very solid. This is exactly why the game is useful. White must win against a healthy Caro-Kann, not against a blunder. Bishop takes h6. Anand removes the h6 knight. This is a very important practical decision. In earlier chapters, black often used a knight on f5 to blockade and attack white's center. Anand stops that plan before it becomes comfortable. G takes h6. Black recaptures, but the structure changes. Karpov now has doubled h-pawns. White has given up the bishop pair, but black's king shelter is less clean. Queen d2. The queen immediately targets h6. White is not exchanging a piece just for structure. White has a follow-up, put pressure on the weakened king side and make black defend. King g7. Karpov defends h6 and steps away from possible tactics. The black king is safe for now, but it has been pulled into a slightly awkward role. Knight a5. Excellent. White uses the queenside squares before black can organize. The knight attacks c6 and b7 ideas, and it interferes with black's smooth development. Queen c7. Black moves the queen and prepares to challenge the center. Karpov still wants a normal Caro-Kann story, pressure on d4, central breaks, and active pieces. C takes d5. Anand clarifies the center on his terms. This is another improvement over passively waiting. White chooses when the pawn structure changes. Let's see what happens if c5 is played instead of c takes d5. c5, f6, b4, king h8, queen e3, rook g8. Black prepares for attack along the g-file. Let's return back to the main line. E takes d5. Black recaptures with the e-pawn. Now the e-file and the e6 square become important. White's next phase is based on central pressure. b4. White gains queenside space. This move is a direct answer to Black's Caro Kann solidity. If Black wants to sit behind the center, White will gain space on the queen side and make the pieces uncomfortable. f6. Karpov attacks the e5 pawn. This is the standard counterargument. Black says, your advanced pawn is a target. Rook on the a-file to e1. Anand brings the rook to the e-file. This is the correct reaction. White does not merely defend e5, White prepares to use the e-file tactically. Rook on the a-file to e8. Black also brings a rook to the e-file. The battle is now about who benefits from opening the center. Let's see what happens if f takes e5 is played instead of rook on the a-file to e8. F takes e5. D takes e5. Knight takes e5. Knight takes e5. Queen takes e5. Bishop takes a6. Queen c7. Bishop takes b7. Rook takes a5. Rook takes e7, check. Queen takes e7. Queen b2, check. King f7. B takes a5. White is winning. Let's return back to the main line. Queen c3. White keeps the queen active and eyes c6 and e3 ideas. Notice the difference from the earlier Black wins. White is not tied down to d4. White's pieces keep finding active squares. Let's see what happens if e6 is played instead of queen c3. e6. A missed opportunity. Knight b6. Knight b3. Knight c4. Bishop takes c4. D takes c4. Knight c5. Bishop takes c5. D takes c5. Bishop d3. Rook e3. Bishop takes f1. King takes f1. King h8. Queen d4. White is better. Let's return back to the main line. Bishop d8. Karpov attacks the knight on a5 and tries to remove White's queenside pressure. Bishop d3. White brings another piece into the center. The bishop on d3 adds pressure on g6 and helps White prepare the central break. Let's see what happens if e takes f6, check is played instead of bishop d3. E takes f6, check. Knight takes f6. Knight e5. c5. Knight takes g6. Knight e4. Queen e3. H takes g6. D takes c5. b6. The position is approximately equal. Let's return back to the main line. F takes e5. Black finally captures on e5. This is the moment Black has been playing for. In many Caro Kann games, if Black wins or dissolves the e5 pawn safely, White's space advantage disappears. Bishop takes g6. Anand first removes the bishop on g6. White does not rush to recapture. He improves the tactical situation before clarifying the center. H takes g6. Black recaptures, but the kingside structure becomes even more damaged. This matters later. Black has accepted structural weaknesses to keep material balance. D takes e5. White restores the advanced pawn. Now the e-pawn becomes a spear. It is not just extra space, it is a potential passer. c5. Karpov hits the center from the side. This is the same Caro Kann reflex we saw in the first chapters. Black attacks the base of White's center. e6, check. Powerful. This is the move that shows White's improvement. Instead of letting Black's c5 pressure decide the game, Anand pushes through and creates a dangerous passed pawn with check. Knight f6. Black blocks and develops the knight. Karpov wants to eliminate the e6 pawn and restore control. Knight b3. White repositions the knight and attacks c5. The knight returns from a5 with purpose. Anand's pieces are moving around concrete targets. C takes b4. Black captures on b4 and opens the queen side. Karpov is trying to create counterplay before the e6 pawn becomes decisive. Queen takes b4. White recaptures with the queen. The queen stays active, and the e6 pawn remains alive. Bishop e7. Black attacks the queen and develops the bishop. Karpov wants to gain time and finally blockade the pawn. Queen d2. White retreats, but keeps pressure. The queen still watches h6 and supports the central passer. Bishop takes a3. Black wins a pawn. Karpov is still resourceful. White's attack must justify the material and structural risk. Queen d3. Anand centralizes the queen with tempo ideas. The queen eyes g6 and a6, and the rook on e1 supports the e-pawn. Bishop d6. Black develops the bishop to a strong defensive square. The bishop attacks h2 and helps control e5. Knight on the b-file to d4. White brings the knight into the center. Now the knight supports e6 and attacks key squares. This is exactly how White should use the space advantage: piece activity first, pawn breaks second. Queen c4. Karpov offers queen trades and attacks the queen. When defending a cramped position, Black often wants exchanges. White must decide whether simplification helps or hurts. Queen b1. Anand keeps queens on. This is important. White's initiative is still alive, so White avoids releasing the pressure too early. Queen b4. Black keeps asking for exchanges. Karpov is trying to reduce White's attacking chances. Let's see what happens if rook e7 is played instead of queen b4. Rook e7. Let's return back to the main line. Anand pushes again. The passed pawn reaches e7 and attacks the rook on f8. This is the dream of the advance variation. The e-pawn is no longer a target, it is a weapon. Rook f7. Black defends and attacks the pawn. The position is tactically sharp. Knight e6, check. White adds a knight check. Now black's king is pulled further into the fight. The initiative belongs to white. King h7. Karpov steps away. Knight f8, check. Anand keeps the checks flowing. The knight on f8 is a tactical visitor, but it forces black's rook coordination to collapse. Rook takes f8. Black captures the knight. Karpov gives material back to remove the dangerous piece. E takes f8, promoting to knight, check. White promotes by capture to a knight with check. This is a rare and beautiful moment. The e-pawn that black wanted to prove weak has promoted. Bishop takes f8. Black captures the promoted knight. Materially, the tactics have simplified, but black's pieces have been dragged into awkward squares. White's initiative continues. Queen d3. White centralizes again. The queen keeps pressure on the king side and supports the next phase of the attack. Queen c4. Black offers more exchanges. This is Karpov's defensive instinct, reduce danger. Queen e3. Anand avoids a careless queen trade and keeps pressure. White's queen stays active, and black's king is still not fully comfortable. Queen e4. Black tries to force simplification. If white allows everything to disappear, black may survive. Knight e5. White improves the knight with tempo. The knight attacks f7 and g6 ideas. White's pieces are now more active than black's, even after the dramatic pawn promotion sequence. Rook g7. Black defends along the 7th rank. Karpov is holding, but his pieces are passive. Queen b6. The queen invades. White attacks b7 and g6. This is a very practical attacking move. When the king is defended, switch targets. Queen f5. Black defends and looks for queen activity. Knight f3. White brings the knight back into the attack. Anand does not force matters too soon. He improves the piece and keeps black tied down. Rook f7. Black defends f7 and prepares to consolidate. Rook e5. The rook enters with tempo. This is a classic attacking principle, bring every piece into the attack before cashing in. Queen f4. Black offers queen exchanges again. Karpov knows that the queen trade may reduce white's attacking chances. Rook e6. Anand refuses to release the pressure. The rook on e6 is powerful. It attacks g6 and supports the queen's invasion. Knight d7. Black develops the knight and attacks the queen. Karpov tries to drive white back. Queen b1. White keeps the queen active on the diagonal. The queen attacks g6, and the rook on e6 makes black's king uncomfortable. Queen g4. Black attacks the rook and looks for counterplay. The defense is resourceful, but white has the initiative. Rook e3. White retreats the rook to a safe square. Anand keeps the pressure without giving black a tactical shot. Bishop c5. Black activates the bishop and attacks e3. Karpov is trying to exchange white's active rook. Rook d3. White shifts the rook and keeps control of the third rank. The rook can defend, attack, and swing to the king's side. Queen f5. Black again seeks queen activity and exchanges. Knight d4. The knight jumps forward. White blocks black's pressure and creates threats against f5 and b7. Queen h5. Black moves the queen to the king's side. Karpov wants counterplay against h2 and g-pawns, but white moves faster. Rook h3. The rook swings to the king's side. This is a beautiful attacking maneuver. White's rook has gone from e1 to e5 to e6 to e3 to d3 and now h3. The whole rook lift is built on piece activity. Queen g4. Black attacks the rook again. Knight f3. White calmly improves the knight and protects key squares. The attack is not just one move. It is pressure, restraint, and then a new entry point. Rook e7. Black defends and tries to exchange rooks. Karpov is still fighting for simplification. Queen takes b7. Anand wins a pawn. After all the pressure, white finally cashes in. The queen also becomes very active on the 7th rank. Queen c4. Black attacks the rook and tries to create counterplay. Queen b2. White keeps everything protected. The queen defends the rook and keeps pressure on the board. h5. Black pushes the h-pawn and tries to create looked and counterplay. But the kingside pawns are also targets. Rook g3. White attacks g6. The damaged kingside structure from move 11 now matters. White keeps targeting the weaknesses Anand created earlier. Rook e2. Black's rook becomes active. Karpov threatens counterplay on the 2nd rank. Queen a1. White retreats the queen while keeping the long diagonal. The queen still eyes g7 and h8 ideas. a5. Black creates queenside counterplay. Karpov wants a passed a-pawn before white breaks through. Knight g5, check. White forces the king back. The knight enters with check, and black's king is again under pressure. King g8. Black steps away. Knight h3. The knight returns to guard key squares and support the queen. White is not rushing. Anand keeps black restricted. Knight e5. Black centralizes the knight and attacks d3 and g4 ideas. Karpov is looking for activity at last. Queen takes a5. White wins the a-pawn. Black's queenside counterplay disappears, and white's material advantage starts to matter. Bishop e7. Black attacks h4 and tries to coordinate. Queen a7. White places the queen on the 7th rank. This is where attacking games often become decisive. The queen penetrates, and black has no easy way to chase it. Knight g4. Black attacks and creates threats against h2 and f2. Even in trouble, Karpov sets practical problems. Rook f3. White defends and keeps the attack going. The rook protects f2 and prepares to support the queen. Knight e5. Black repeats the knight attack. Rook e3. White offers rook activity again. The rook stays flexible and keeps control. King f7. The king steps toward the center. Black wants to escape the mating net and consolidate. Queen b7. White keeps the queen active. The queen attacks e7 and keeps black's king under pressure. King f6. Black walks forward. This looks active, but it also exposes the king to tactics. Rook takes e2. White removes the rook. This is the final simplification on white's terms, not black's. Queen takes e2. Black recaptures with the queen. Knight f4. And black resigned. The knight attacks e2 and g6 ideas, the queen remains active, and black's king is too exposed. Karpov has no satisfactory defense. This is the white side lesson we needed. Against the advanced Caro Kann, white cannot only hold space. White must improve the pieces, challenge black's usual breaks, create a passed e-pawn when the moment arrives, and keep the initiative alive. As we saw in this lesson, Anand showed white's improvement plan against the advanced Caro Kann. Use the short setup flexibly, stop black's knight f5 blockade, challenge the center with c4, create a passed e-pawn, and keep the pieces active instead of drifting into passive defense.